So I want you to imagine two nations at war. They have lost so many people to this war that they've decided that it's time to sit down and find a peaceful resolution to their fighting. The two nations spoke different languages, so they decided on one translator who was tasked with conveying their emotions, thoughts, and feelings. And however, this person was great at translating, but they weren't good at conveying the general's true feelings and emotions. And before they knew it, the two nations were at war again. And that brings me to the topic of today's video about how manga scripts are made. But before we get into this video, if you're new, don't hesitate to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and hit that bell for notifications when you want to hear things that I have to say. Now let's get into it. Hey there everyone, it's your boy Vandal, and today we're going to get into writing scripts for your manga. This one should be pretty simple, but if you haven't watched the other videos in this manga making series, I would catch up on those to make sure you have everything that you need for today and you're caught up. So check those out in the link somewhere on top on the left or right hand side. I don't know which one. Now, what are you going to need for creating your manga scripts? The first place I would start is where should you write your manga script? So when you're thinking about starting your manga script, it's less about the what and more about where and when should you write your script. Now the first thing I would say is that you can use just about anything to create your script. You could write it on pencil and paper, you could type it on a keyboard, you can even chisel a hammer into a nail and stone. Okay, well, maybe not that one, but you get what I mean. So script writing is open to what you're comfortable with. There are tons of programs out there that you can use, and honestly, I would stick to a simple word program, nothing too robust. But for those of you who are here on this channel, you know that I love to give out free templates. So if you're looking for a free template, you can check out the link down below, and there'll be one there for you to fill out the script as we go along on how to structure it. So now that we have our template booted up, let's get into how we want to structure our whole script. So the structure of your script is relatively simple, but it's also super important because what it needs to do is it needs to be as clear as possible for yourself or for the artist that you're working with to draw your manga. So to help with that clarity, what I do is I create sections. This can be seen like in your template that you might have open hopefully right now. The scenes are going to help greatly with organizing your script, and what we're going to do with each of these scenes is we're going to put the dialogue, so what the two characters are saying to each other, inside of each scene. From the first scene, what you want to put in here is a description in the scene to get an idea of what's happening, and so the dialogue can flow just as well. Once you have your scene established, you can get into what each character is going to say, and that of course is the dialogue. This is a side note for people who are just writing the script, and that's because you, the person who is just writing the script, needs to be as descriptive as possible. If you skimp on the details, it will make things a lot harder for your artist to figure out and visualize. Sometimes artists work really well with less direction, but I think it never hurts to be as clear as possible in the things you want so your final product looks as great. Because I promise you, you need to put in the details of everything as much as possible so everyone can know what's going on. I cannot stress that enough. Please don't just say to your artist to have artistic freedom. Again, the more detailed you are in your additional notes of your scenes and even what the character is doing, and your artist will be better informed and your final product will even look better than you could even imagine. But delving into that part that we talked about earlier, we talked about the dialogue, and the dialogue is basically the heart of your script. And please, I am begging you to make sure that your dialogue is interesting to read. Don't write what you think the character would say, write what your character would say. It sounds like a one-to-one thing, but it's a little bit different. That said, it takes knowing who is talking. So know your character, think about their personality, how they would react to a situation, and make that feel natural so it doesn't feel so forced. I know a lot of manga and anime have done things that we've seen, but there's always a way to mix it up, and that's what makes this so hard. So after you understand your character's personality, we need to become an actor. Okay, and I'm not talking about like Broadway type actor or nothing professional, but this is gonna take some practice. Pretend that you're your character and see how would they react to the situation and what they would say in that situation. This is really hard because in essence you need to become someone else, and that's always hard, trying to put yourself in someone else's shoe. So those who practice empathy are definitely a lot better and have a head start. That's why I said it's going to take you some practice to get it, but keep practicing as you create characters and imagine them. And then this is going to make you sound crazy, but in your head sometimes play out how they would act or react or say their dialogue inside of your head. Even looking in a mirror and gesturing and making faces or just trying to be like Shakespeare will really help you understand and become one with your character. You'll be really surprised what you're able to come up with when you do that. Now this is going to be the most important part of your dialogue because there are two parts. That first part is keeping your dialogue meaningful. There is such dialogue that says nothing, even though your character in some way has actually spoken, but that adds no value for your character or the story. So you can see there's two different ways that your character can speak and say nothing at all that adds nothing to the story. And sometimes that's okay, but for the most part we want to keep it meaningful so we can keep our reader engaged. That's not to say your character can't be silly sometimes, but even in those moments it can be meaningful, but maybe it can also be a break of tension or create some type of segue for things to come. The point is to have intentionality with your words of your character and trying to cut the most fluff out as possible. Remember what happened at the beginning of our video and how that war started? This is the same kind of thing. Be intentional. Now the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the character that you're creating or speaking doesn't have to say everything that's going on, and this is normally known as exposition, and it has its place, but that's why we choose to write manga and not a book, because we want to show pictures and show what's going on. So you need to be deliberate here and make sure you're not just saying everything that's going on. The absence of dialogue is the best way to key the reader in to those important moments that need to be seen or just revealed, like a revelation to themselves, so the reader knows what's going on and they can see what the character's thinking or something important that's happening in the scene. That's a really good technique. It's called, show, don't tell. And it also shows that you trust in your reader and you're not just telling them everything because you believe they won't understand what you're trying to show them. It helps, believe me. I would say practice this a little bit more so it can be a little bit more fluid and intuitive, because at first you might not be that good, because sometimes you yourself, the author, can think about something is so clear and it makes sense to you because you've read it so many times, but the reader is like, what just happened? It doesn't really make sense. So sometimes what you think in your head is not actually what's out there in the world. So it's something to balance and definitely have other people read to see if they actually get that once you get to that step in your manga making process. So work on that exposition. It definitely has its place inside of your story, but it definitely doesn't need to be on every page explaining how everything works all the time, because then you might as well just have written a whole book. Am I right? And I think this is a nice point to put in for your dialogue, and that's scene action. So what I like to do with scene actions is say what's happening as your character is talking. So maybe they're gesturing, maybe they hit someone, maybe they're walking back and forth. I like to include them in certain scenes or in general because it'll really help you get to understand what's going to happen when you need to start storyboarding your whole manga. So the more detailed you are and able to visualize the scene and what's happening, the easier it'll be to draw when it comes to that time. So for example, you can say that Caesar was walking into a room or walking to a hallway, and then he reached in to grab the knob and was shocked once he saw what happened. Now, did I really put that in there? But that's just an example of what you can do to make it easier to draw as you visualize the scene. So as you can see here, there's some pages that I also used in Besiege where I used it and it's peppered out through the whole manga. You can pause the video here to take a look and see how I used it and get an understanding of what I mean by the scene actions. Now getting back into the dialogue, this is something that we talked about in exposition, but this is a little bit more nuanced, and that's saying that sometimes when your character speaks, not everything needs to be said at some points. Like when you're talking, you don't always lay out all of your cards. Just like when you want to make sure you don't say everything in your exposition, this is kind of another case where it can help you keep your dialogue concise while making your reader want to know more about what is going to be said in the future, and maybe to bring that up at a later point because that may be important. So that said, just like in exposition where you don't want to say everything that's going on, you also don't want to say too much about your character and leave your reader interested wanting to know that little bit more that wasn't said or left unsaid. It's a really good like cliffhanger way to do it. If you have an invested group of people, then it'll definitely get them hooked and want to know what's happening later in their show, and definitely keep them interested to want to read more. Your goal here is to make that dialogue that makes them want to keep reading more into your story with things that aren't said. It's just one of those good writing techniques to think about and putting in your dialogue and what your character's saying. Now with that out of the way, one of the last things that I like to do is create the page number, because this is super, I say this a lot, important just to know where we're going in and out of what page. And this takes a little bit of visualization and kind of bleeds into storyboarding, but it's one of those things that will get fixed later and you don't need to worry too much about it now. But just a rule of thumb that I like to do is I like to keep about 6 lines of dialogue to a page. So I think of it as 1 line of dialogue is 1 box. And this is not always the case throughout your whole manga. That's going to shift and change, and that's up to you and how many pages you want to create for your manga. But I would make it a rule of thumb, and I'll talk about it more in the storyboard, is that I wouldn't go more than 7 panels a page. So I do that to keep the action of the dialogue a little bit interesting and get that person to really want to turn to the next page in my mind as I'm thinking about the storyboard. So as I try to pace it out like that, it's not really easy. It's something that you'll figure out the more manga that you make, how you'll figure out the flow of how many pages you'll need and get that right amount of how many panels that can fit on the page and the art that's going to go with the dialogue. This is all just part of the process, but one of those things that can be a little bit hard in the beginning. So this is something I'll talk about a little bit more in another video, and that's about flow and pacing. It's something I think will be really important to how your dialogue is structured with your panels, and how some pages might be slower than others and some might move a little bit faster, and you'll figure that out as you kind of pair your script with your storyboard, and they kind of feed off of each other because one is visual and one is written, and sometimes they affect each other in different ways that you might not expect or you might not see as you start your script for the first time and then you go into your storyboard. It's something I'll get into a lot more once we get into storyboards. Now let's get into the end game of what you need to do after you finish the first draft of your manga script. What I highly recommend that you do is you have someone read it, and not a friend that'll say everything that you write is the next Hunter x Hunter, but someone who's going to give constructive feedback, because this is key. Make sure you're getting that feedback, and to do that you need more than one opinion. So what you'll do is take some notes that they'll give you, and then you'll make another draft and you'll keep iterating until you get to that nice point. I think a good idea is to diversify your readership. Maybe someone who's familiar with your genre, someone who isn't your friend, as well as someone who can give proper feedback, and maybe someone who knows nothing at all, which is important to see how someone who knows nothing about your genre or your story sees how your story goes and how it impacts them and how you can make different edits there. And then you can line them up with your notes and see what parts all stick out to them that all seem to be an issue or seem to be working, and then you can make more iterations from there. And believe me, they're gonna say a lot. Maybe they'll say it's too bloated, or your pacing's out of whack, or it's going to suck to have to keep going back to revise your story. But don't worry, when you do that, your story will be better because of it. However, what is good here is that the feedback is coming from different angles, and that you can see something that you might have not noticed otherwise that we talked about earlier, and you can see where things are starting to line up and a consistent problem or a consistent good thing is happening with your story. And I know you spent this much time trying to get your script together, but don't worry, you want to create something that's really great when you put in the work. So you're gonna make another version, rinse and repeat, and see what needs to be corrected till you get the right version. I would say for me, it took me about 4 to 6 versions before I got where I wanted with Note. But a little note that I'll say here is those without a deadline or a certain time and point, you will need to continue on your story and not just stay in the revision process too long. And conversely, if you're someone who's like doing a week-to-week series, I don't know who you are, you're amazing. But if you're doing like something that has short turnaround time, you don't have too much time to go in this revision process. So just try your best with what you got and just work through the paces like that, because you won't make it perfect, but it'll be great with the feedback that you do have. When you're on your final draft, let your beta readers go through it one last time to just give them their last final thoughts on what your story is. At this point, you really can't change it, or you just need to be okay with what you have. But before their final thoughts, you need to make peace with what you have just created, and understand that everyone will have their critiques, and that's okay, because this is art and art is subjective for people to find what they might like or might not like. Everything is different for everyone, so don't take it too much to heart. Just try and see what might be the final outcome of your story and how people might actually perceive it, if you see any consistent notes pop up between your different beta readers. That said, you'll have to do one more pass and make sure it isn't for the story flow or anything, that is just for any spelling errors or grammar or weird speech, or unless it was intentional that you made it in your dialogue. Just checking off those little things because they'll help you later on in your process. Now, this part isn't necessarily necessary, but I like to make a physical version of my own script, and as well keep a digital copy because you can always take it around with you wherever. But having a physical copy when sometimes computers aren't accessible or if they aren't charged is a good idea. Physical copy is also a good backup because it makes you, seem a little bit more professional. You can be like, oh, here's my script, and then they can be like, ooh, you're so fancy, mangaka you. See how that works? But a digital option is just as good so that you can take it with you, but it just might be my old school nature that likes having around a physical script, but it's up to you at this point. Now, once you've gone through your script, you shaped it up, you're at revision 3, 4, 5, or 6, which should be good enough to get you started storyboarding. Some things to remember: the structure will make your script really easy to read and follow what's going on. It'll allow you to create dialogue that's meaningful to your character and your story. Work with not telling too much and find that balance with showing and leaving some things unsaid to your reader and giving them that sense of wonder, but not over explaining the world to them too much. Have some beta readers read what you've made, take their notes, and make those revisions. Overall, if you follow these, I think the clarity of your script will shine and really help others for the next phase in your journey, and that's when we're gonna talk about the all-important storyboards. But that's all I have for today for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something that you can use in your scripts. If you did, you can drop a like. If you want to know and see what we're going to do with storyboards, click that subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be alerted when we do. But question, what's the worst part about making scripts? What do you feel like is difficult? Is it the dialogue? Is it structuring? Is it the overall pacing? What about it? Or is it not hard at all? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. But till then, guys, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace. Boy.